One night in 1990, what begins as a harmless night drive Tina Salvatore, a teenage girl, embarks on, turns into something dreadful when she notices a stalking car behind her. As if the driver is playing mind games, he overtakes her, but stops a short distance in front. Now scared and no longer enjoying her music, Tina speeds past, but the driver follows after a few seconds, making it obvious he's after her. She pulls up to a gas station, trying the locked doors and shouting for help, but no one answers since it's closed. The driver also pulls up, takes his sweet time to retrieve a tool from the trunk, then turns Tina's music off. He begins his hunt. Hiding by the bushes, Tina notices an oncoming truck and decides to take her chance with it. Thinking she's found help, she falls on the ground with relief. Sometime later in Kern County, Deputy Sheriff Joe Deacon is given an assignment by Captain Henry to go get evidence in L.A. for a robbery case. With a preliminary hearing the next day, no evidence means no conviction. Afterward, Deke sets out on his journey and arrives at the LA Forensic Unit. He asks the lab attendant for the evidence, and his attention is caught by a bagged item on the table. The attendant confirms the evidence, but tells him it isn't leaving the unit without a signature.
Not yours.
She needs authorization from Homicide to release it, since it's supposed to be retested. When he comes out of the building, he sees his truck being prepared to get towed, courtesy of a nonchalant Sergeant Jim Baxter. Luckily, he stops this before heading to the precinct. He goes to his longtime friend Captain Carl's office and learns that the test would be run first thing the next morning. If there's no match, he's cleared to take it. Carl has already called Henry, who's instructed Deke to stay in the city until the tests are complete, then deliver the evidence the next day. Carl thinks it's a good thing, since Deke would get a chance to visit all his friends he left behind when he moved to Kern County. Deke greets another buddy, Sergeant Rogers, before going to stand by the door of the press conference room, where Jim is giving a speech about the serial killings. Deke whispers something to a reporter who knows him, and the reporter raises his hand when Jim opens the floor for questions.
I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is, after 2 months and 4 victims, you don't have a suspect.
Jim replies that they don't have any that can be discussed, and Deke leaves the room, while Jim's eyes follow him like a stray. Afterward, Carl tells Jim about the pressure they're facing, hinting that they might reach out to the feds for help at some point. This doesn't make Jim happy at all. Later that evening, Deke comes across his old friend, Detective Sal, who offers to buy him coffee so they can catch up. Meanwhile, Jim learns of Deke's identity, realizing he is the legendary Joe Deacon. He meets up with them at the cafe, and Deke comments on his method of handling the press conference. Before Jim leaves with Sal, he invites Deke to join them in checking out the crime scene, even suggesting that Deke can give some pointers. When they arrive, Officer Henderson tells them the power is off inside the victim Julie Brock's building, but he's made some calls to get it fixed. They all head upstairs with flashlights, then put them off to use the UV light. The power suddenly comes back on, startling everyone with the sore sight. Jim tries analyzing the scene, wondering why the body doesn't align, while Deke suggests Sal get the prints from the window. He sees Flo, an old friend, and she can't believe her eyes. She asks him to stick around till she's done, and he agrees. They continue with a sweep of the apartment, and Jim quietly asks Sal when Deke is going to break the case for him. Well, Deke has his own style of doing things. After checking the body with Flo, Jim is sure that the lady was moved, while Deke continues looking through, no doubt trying to piece the case together. Later, Deke heads to the building directly opposite Julie's apartment, sitting and looking from that point of view, and Jim notices this. Afterward, he tells Detective Jamie to do a full investigation, a thorough check on Julie's background, and a sweep for sex offenders and peeping toms. He also reminds her to lean on the labs for prints. He calls out Deke's quietness, making Deke ask if any of the other victims had bite marks. Jim shares that one of them did, wondering why Deke is asking. Deke feels it's a similar case up north and doesn't say any other thing as they enter the car. After dropping Deke off, Jim offers to buy him breakfast the next morning, sharing the location before driving off. While driving through the streets, Deke sees an abundance of prostitutes, which is ironic given that there's a dangerous and creepy serial killer on the loose. Meanwhile, a young lady parts ways with her running partner for the night, but a strange car suddenly follows her direction. It seems like the killer has found his next victim. The next morning, Deke calls Henry, who tells him they no longer need the evidence, and he's expected to come back the next day. Jim meets him, revealing that he knows he was the one spotted by the observatory and admits he would have missed it if Deke hadn't gone there. A guy named Stan Peters, who is a sex offender, has been picked up for peeping in the victim's neighborhood, and Jim suggests Deke stay a bit for the interrogation. Afterward, Stan, already anxious for being in that room, gets way more nervous when Jim shows him pictures of Julie. He tries defending himself, saying that he was only easing himself in the alley when she walked by, swearing that he has nothing to do with her death. Deke, watching them outside, picks up the telephone and tells Jim something. After dropping the phone, Jim asks Stan what he knows about a lady named Mary Roberts. Stan's whole demeanor suddenly changes, and he begins moving to the glass mirror wall, directly where Deke is standing on the other side, like he can feel Deke's presence. Afterward, Jim asks Deke more about the link between Mary and Stan, but Deke purposely remains vague. Jim then heads to Jamie's desk, telling her to retrieve Mary's record. She tells him about the Rathbons, who've come to file a missing person report, the girl who was running the previous night. They think their daughter Rhonda is tied to the ongoing case, but Jim places this under missing persons since they haven't seen any corpse.
We got a corpse, but it's still missing persons.
The man has had too much bad news. While driving back to Kern County, Deke sees a group of teenagers enjoying a fun ride, and even smiles warmly at one of them. This gives him a change of heart toward leaving LA. He heads to the crime scene investigation unit and meets up with Flo. He's come to examine Julie's body, and Flo tells him the MO is similar to the other 4 victims. It seems the killer came back after the victim expired and propped her against the door. The dental on the bites turns out inconclusive, and Flo thinks it has to do with more sucking and less biting, like a previous victim. Also, traces of sodium benzoate used in mouthwash were found in the bites. Another disturbing detail is the fact that the killer gave her a post-mortem shave and nicked her on the leg, though no blood. Tired of the depressing review, Flo asks Deke if he's hungry, and he quickly tells her he'll buy if she pulls up an old file for him. When she sees the reference, her expression immediately shifts. She knows it isn't just about a case up north, and wonders what could be going on. He only stares blankly at her, and she decides to get the file, but warns that she can't be there for him again if something goes wrong. After Flo leaves, Deke begins talking to Julie's body. He feels she knew her killer, or at least the killer knew her. Afterwards, during dinner, Flo tells Deke her take on the world.
There's good and there's bad, but you gotta fight.
She admits that what she sees when she looks into his eyes isn't good. She pulls out a key, stretching it to him, and tells him it's to remind her of what they did. After some hesitation, he takes the key. Later, Deke enters Julie's apartment and begins looking through the fridge. The landlady comes out, startled to see him there, thinking the police were done with the apartment. He asks how long the fridge has been broken and if she's responsible for repairs. This immediately makes her think he wants to move in, but he laughs the crazy thought off. She called a guy from ABC Appliance to fix the fridge, but after Julie's death, it just didn't seem so important. Deke writes this down and confirms that everything in the fridge was already rotten. He asks for the remaining items inside the fridge for evidence, and she moves to do just this. He then sits by the window, recalling the scene. This brings back a memory of a crime scene in the woods, but the landlady interrupts. She wonders how one ever gets used to the smell, and Deke quietly says, if one is lucky, they don't. She heads to leave, reminding him to close up when he's done. Afterward, Deke drives to a motel and sees some prostitutes standing in front. When he enters, the owner begins swearing that he has nothing to do with the girls in front, thinking Deke is there to question him. However, Deke just needs a room. He pays the amount and takes the key before heading upstairs. He pastes the pictures of the victims on the wall, looking at them with a flashlight while lying on the bed, but he hallucinates the girls, seeing them standing helplessly before him, making him unable to sleep. The next morning, Carl summons Jim, sharing that Stan has taken his life. He wonders what it has to do with Kern County, and Jim reveals Deke watched through the glass since he has a similar case up north. Carl isn't happy about this, revealing Deke hasn't worked a murder case since he was put off 5 years ago. Carl wonders if Jim knows about Deke, and Jim shares what he thinks he knows. However, Carl explains what really happened.
The guy worked the case so hard, he got a suspension, a divorce, and a triple bypass, all in 6 months.
Jim actually took Deke's place, and Carl advises him not to get mixed up with Deke. Jim doesn't see the big deal since Deke has gone back, but Carl shares that his CO said Deke has taken vacation days. Pretty clear his vacation isn't to go play golf. Deke begins his mission and heads to the ABC Appliance building, getting access to the employee list and repair appointment book. Just as he gets into his car to leave, he notices a signpost, AAA Appliances, from his rearview mirror and gets down to check the place out. Flashing his badge, he asks to see the repair orders for the last 2 weeks and a list of all employees. He observes the workers and notices an order that was canceled out on the list. He takes the pages and then leaves the shop. At the indent lab, Jim is frustrated to learn that they've hit a brick wall with the prints, mostly because of appliances. Afterward, he visits the Rathbons and they play a video of their missing daughter, Rhonda, the lady who went on a night run. She always wears a red beret anytime she goes for her run, and Jim promises to find her before leaving. Later that night, another body is found washed up beneath a bridge. After a quick check, Jim discovers the girl isn't Rhonda and looks up to see Deke, though he's not surprised by his presence. Deke asks what he's gotten about the body so far, and Jim reveals it's the same MO of the serial killer. He switches the conversation, asking about Mary Roberts, and reveals the Stan incident. However, he is called to take a look at something in the crime scene, while Deke just looks on quietly. Later, Jim meets him again by the bridge, and Deke gives him the list of employee names to check through, as a means of making it up to him, since Jim got into a confrontation with Carl because of him. Jim brings up his offer of breakfast, and Deke follows him home. With the day now bright, they both sit for breakfast, while Anna, Jim's wife, is pleased to host Deke. Her daughters come downstairs, and the youngest gives Deke a peck before leaving for school with Anna, which warms Deke's heart. Afterward, Deke pays a visit to Marcia, his ex-wife, who was surprised to see him after a long time. After an almost awkward conversation, they both part ways. In his office, Jim gets 3 files: Mary Roberts, Paige Callahan, and Tamara Ewing. They were all hookers and were found drugged and stabbed to death on the same night and same location. Later, Jim meets up with Deke at a bar, and they both discuss the serial killer and the 6 victims so far. Jim asks a serious question.
Why are you trying to solve a 5-year-old case that everyone else has forgotten about?
Deke only looks, unable to say anything. Afterward, he takes Jim to a location and begins explaining the crime scene from 5 years ago, which seems similar to the present case. Deke feels like it's his responsibility, and he now owns the girls. He is now their angel, trying to turn the ledger. However, he advises Jim to stay out of Angel's business. Deke's only desire is to finish the job, just like Jim is trying to do. While Deke drives Jim back, Jim feels it's not the same killer responsible for the murders, but Deke isn't putting that out as an option yet. Jim gives him the file on the employees, revealing that 2 out of all had an assault record, nothing really serious. He feels Deke's theory doesn't hold water, and Deke just wants to clear his conscience. He's done with the teamwork and gets down to leave. Deke asks for Julie's last supper, and Jim tells him it was roast beef, wondering why that is important. Well, Deke feels it's the little things that are important.
It's the little things that get you caught.
After checking the employee files, he then heads over to Albert Sparma's apartment and begins checking out his car. Sparma suddenly appears out of nowhere, and Deke flashes his torch at him, feigning interest in buying the car. Sparma says the for sale sign was for another car, but it seems this doesn't pass through Deke's ears at all. He asks about the trunk space, which instantly catches Sparma's attention. He only points, then dumps his waste bag in the bin. Later, Deke arrives at the motel with the bag and calls Sal, telling him to run a DMV check on Albert Leonard Sparma to see if he sold any cars in the last few months. Inside his room, he spills the contents of the bag, finding mostly garbage and a half-eaten pizza. The next morning, he takes the pizza to Flo, and she measures the bite marks with those of Julie and Ewing. It turns out inconclusive, though there are some similarities on the marks. She's also noticed something else, revealing Sparma is from back east since he folds his pizza slice, making Deke smile. He then sets out and begins stalking Sparma all through the day. It continues till the next day, but Sparma catches up with Deke. With both cars side by side, he asks Deke about the trunk space of the car he's gotten before pointing again and driving away. The man definitely seems suspicious. Jim receives a call from Deke, who asks where the second victim was found. The location was never leaked to the press, and the nearest mile marker is 467. Turns out it's the exact same spot Sparma was at, making Deke way more suspicious. Sal tells Jim about an abandoned car registered under Sparma, whom Deke asked him to check, and they go to inspect it. Nothing comes out from the search, and Jim decides to go pick up the prints, telling Jamie to get Deke, a patrol dep, and pick up Sparma. She reminds him about Tina, who's there as a potential witness, but that's the least of Jim's worries. He gets frustrated when he gets to the indent lab. Sparma's fingerprint is similar to the killer's, but they can't get a definite match. Jim almost punches the nonchalant attendant, but regains self-control and storms out. Sparma is brought in for questioning, but he taunts Jim and Sal with his antics. Deke comes in, giving him pictures of the victims' bodies, and Deke loses control over Sparma's behavior, accusing him of having an erection while looking through the pictures. Though this is true, Sparma only laughs at Deke. Afterward, Jim gives Tina some pictures of possible suspects, asking her to ID the person who stalked her. When she gets to Sparma's, she pauses and asks to see him up close. She knows he's in the station, since she saw him earlier while coming out of the restroom. Unfortunately, this compromises her eligibility as an objective witness, making Jim frustrated. In his office, Carl tells Jim that the sheriff is calling in the feds, and they have a guy coming on Monday since no progress has been made on the case, rather than 2 insubstantial suspects. Before Jim leaves, Carl reveals that Sparma confessed to a murder 8 years ago. However, he was released the next morning because he was lying and taunting the police. Though he knew all the details, he wasn't within 10 miles of the killing. Since he still has 2 days before the case is taken over by the feds, Jim decides to continue the investigation by all means possible. He heads over to Deke's motel room and is surprised to see the pictures of the 3 victims from 5 years ago. He feels Deke is sick and needs a doctor, but Deke feels they've got a suspect. Jim doesn't think so, but Deke calls out to the ache in Jim's guts.
We got something. We just don't know what it is. If I can...
Deke says if he can get into Sparma's apartment for just 5 minutes, he knows the answer is inside there. He wants to nail the killer for himself and begs Jim for this favor. Jim finally caves, and later he calls Sparma from a phone booth, asking to meet up so he could make it up to him for what happened at the station. Jim gets back into the car with Deke, and they both watch as Sparma leaves the apartment. Taking that as cue, Deke leaves the car while Jim tells him he'll horn twice if Sparma returns. Inside the apartment, Deke begins his search. Meanwhile, Sparma arrives at the bar, waiting for a non-existent Jim. Deke finds newspaper clippings of the serial killing inside a compartment in the floorboard. Suddenly, Sparma's police scanner goes off, and Deke hears an officer down, alert for Sparma's address. Acting quickly, Deke leaves the apartment, but the police have already arrived, making him pass through the roof. Jim identifies himself and tries gaining entry, but is stopped since it's not his jurisdiction. He rushes back to the phone booth to call the station, but hangs up without saying anything. Just then, he notices Sparma, who turns and waves to him like they're old friends. Jim notices Deke and drives to his location, and Deke successfully enters the car. Sparma was the one who called the report in. Jim asks if Deke saw a red beret, revealing Rhonda was wearing one when she disappeared. Deke feels he can find out if he's given another 5 minutes. The next morning, Jim shares that Sparma actually reported his truck stolen, but it wasn't looked into. However, the good news is Sparma left town to Detroit less than 6 weeks after the murders from 5 years ago. Deke feels like Sparma knows they're watching him, but Jim likes the idea. Deke wonders if he ever feels like the sitting and waiting is a huge waste of time. Well, the only thing Jim cares about is that no one expires on his watch. They both tail Sparma all through the day till night, but don't get anything out of it, making Jim really frustrated. Afterward, Deke goes to get some things from a store, leaving Jim watching in the car. Just then, he hears the phone ringing nonstop in the phone booth and goes to pick it up. Suddenly, Sparma appears behind, and Jim immediately brings out his gun, training it on him. He orders him to face the gate with his hands held high, and then shows him the picture of Rhonda, asking for her whereabouts. Keeping his character, Sparma taunts Jim, but when he sees how serious Jim is, he agrees to take him to Rhonda. Just as they leave in Sparma's car, Deke sees them and immediately follows. After a long drive, they arrive at a deserted place, and Sparma directs Jim to a particular spot, hinting that Rhonda is underground. He passes a shovel to Jim, but Jim trains his gun at him, asking him to dig instead. Sparma quietly tells him there's a lot to consider, and offers the shovel again as a peace offering. Jim eventually takes it and begins digging, while Sparma just watches. After digging for what feels like an eternity, Sparma reveals another spot, making Jim angry. However, he starts digging the new spot. Meanwhile, Deke draws closer to their location. After Jim digs with no success, Sparma reveals another spot, making it obvious that he's just fooling around at this point. He admits he's never eliminated anyone in his entire life. He gives Jim 2 options. Either Jim believes him and they both drive back home, or Jim continues digging around the field. Jim keeps digging regardless, but Sparma starts taunting him, mentioning his daughters. The words overwhelm Jim, and he suddenly strikes Sparma with the shovel. Sparma drops down to the floor, and Jim tries waking him up, but doesn't get any response. Deke finally arrives, and suddenly gets a flashback when he sees Sparma lying on the floor. Apparently, he mistakenly shot one of the survivors from his murder case back then, while he was investigating the scene with Carl. He goes to check, and discovers that Sparma has passed away. Shaking with fear, Jim tells him it was all Sparma's fault, and he was the serial killer. He believes Sparma practically confessed it when he was taunting him. He wonders what he would do now, but Deke just tells him to bury the body and say nothing to anyone. He promises to be back in a few hours before driving off in Sparma's car. When he arrives at Sparma's apartment, he begins bagging up some of Sparma's belongings. He also gives the car key to someone, leaving the car behind. However, he finds a hidden compartment inside the floor of the apartment. Upon arriving back at the desert, Deke discovers that Jim didn't bury Sparma like he instructed. Rather, he's been digging all around the field, desperate to believe Sparma was their killer. Deke buries Sparma, while Jim just stands in shock.
Our boy Deke, I'm sure he is our boy.
Deke feels no one would care, and besides, he's taken care of the issue. He advises Jim to go back to the station and tell Carl that Sparma was a wash. He needs to ask for a break for a few weeks and to tell Carl that Deke left town. Sparma is gone, and the only way he can come back is if Jim lets him back. Deke instructs him to never go back to Sparma's place or even utter his name or pull his file. If he does this, Sparma would rise up and ruin Jim's life. It's the little things that rip one apart and get them caught. Jim understands, and they both hug warmly before Deke drives away in his car. On Monday morning, the guy from the feds arrives and officially takes over the case, giving everyone a description of the supposed killer's life. They are starting the investigation from scratch, tossing out all the leads the police have gotten so far. Meanwhile, Jim, already on his break, quietly watches his daughters by the swimming pool, while Anna looks at him from the window, knowing something is wrong with him. The doorbell rings and Anna opens up to find Sal, who's brought an envelope from Deke. She takes this to Jim, telling him the source, before leaving him to his thoughts. When he opens it, he sees a note saying no angels, then finds a red beret. Back in Kern County, Deke sets fire to all of Sparma's belongings he collected. Staring at a tin box, he recalls the moment Flo covered for him in the past, writing the victim's cause of death as multiple stab wounds instead of the bullet. Closing the box, he throws it into the flames. He then picks up a new packet of barrettes with the red one missing and tosses that in as well. Watching it all burn, he turns and walks away. Oh well. If you've made it to the end, hit the like button, comment, and share. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next recap.